I mean, I can do a talk, I can do a Q&A. I don't know. To be fully honest, like I'm a touch spaced out. I was basically I had a conversation with one of the organizers, kind of like 5 days ago. I was like, oh, that looks interesting. Yeah, I could talk about team design. That's generally one of the areas that I work on. And then he gave me a time, and I failed to see the message. So then he was like, oh, can you do 8 p.m. your time? I was like, yeah, sure, I'm here. So, you know, I can give you a presentation and stuff, but more I'm like, okay, so I got you here. One person is present. That's awesome. Is anyone else? Offlow, yeah, I guess you're there in some form of shape. Is there anyone else here? Because if, let's say, you know, there's no point giving a broadcast style conversation if it's like two of us at that point. Like I can totally explain the topic and all that. No worries.
And what did you say it was?
More
it was TV?
Team design. So think about it this way. Like we have technology and so on, and we talk a lot about technology, say AI, blockchain, whatever, new technologies. If you don't adopt the new technology, which is kind of like this backbone to the offering that you're doing, is the enabler, the thing that allows you to do whatever it is that you offer for your customers, your users, and so on. And we somehow end up reducing that word technology to a very minimal expression, which most of the time means software. Sometimes a little bit of hardware. And then quite often we're forgetting the other side that's a lot more about the mental models of the technology. Or if you think about management technology, which is generally the field I would say I work on, and I'm using a little bit these buzzworthy things to make the point. But if you think what is management technology, is like what's the backbone, what's the way I approach the way people relate with one another. The same way you could say software is communication in between computers and so on. So
okay.
If you kind of take that lens, you could say that you have what are the technologies that we're using now a lot for management. So in corporates, there is like design thinking, which is all the rage, which is a technology that was already around. Like one of the first mentions is in a book that's in 1959. There is Agile, which is a technology that comes around roughly in 2000 kind of thing. It becomes a thing, and then it was already like a lot of the practices and the ideas around it were already being used, being discussed and so on, but it comes around as a word, as a thing, as a concept that gels around the early 2000s. And we're largely still stuck there. Then you have the other wave that's kind of like the self-management wave. Holacracy comes around in 2015. Largely based on sociocratic thinking, which is way older. And, you know, if you think about the rhythm at which the world is developing and so on, then the question is, what's new? What's happening around now? And what are the mental models? What is the fundamental way we approach how people work together? So that's the kind of research I do. That's the space I think about. That's generally the way I engage with companies. Is about thinking how do you think about leadership? How do you think about management? How do you think about organization? And you can pick different register of words depending on who you're talking with. You can end up using a fairly hippie language around purpose and so on. And I love that stuff. I love talking sarcastically, but I honestly do love that stuff. Or you can use a way more corporate register. And it's very relative on who you're communicating with. So that's why I thought, since we're a very small group, I would kind of love to know just at least a little bit about you guys and what you're into, where you're coming from, what's your interest in this topic, if any, and then take it from there.
I find it super interesting. So I'm kind of new to this whole thing. So I really enjoyed the overview, and I'm glad to have you on here. I was invited on here. I just here to hear all the topics. It's 12 noon where I'm at, and you said it's 8 p.m. your time?
Yeah, I'm London based.
London, okay, wonderful. Yeah, anybody else have a specific question or niche in respect to this?
Okay, I might as well just chip in. This is Oflo over here. So, team design, in essence, in one sentence, how do you describe team design? Because it seems quite explanatory, but it seems that it's an in-depth job as well, Daniel.
It's a what job, sorry?
In-depth job.
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't, right? So let me give you first a touch of blah, blah, and then I'll try to give you the one sentence definition that you asked for. But in like more broadly is something that we're doing all the time. We get a bunch of people together, or we join a group of people that are trying to accomplish something. Let's say us right now, we are in this space. There is some semblance of a purpose, or all of us have a slightly different idea. As I was mentioning at the beginning, I'm kind of coming spaced out. Supposedly there is also some implications around hierarchy. So as the speaker, I'm meant to take control, lead this room, orient the conversation in some way. Hopefully that's meant because I want you guys to hear something that's going to do something for me, or whatever incentives people have. And there is some form of organization that starts happening. So in a very crude way, we are a team, each with our own needs. The same way that in an organization, you would have all these different stakeholders that are coming together, and all of them have different needs, and they're hoping that through that relationship, through that being part of that collective, they're trying to achieve something. So everyone is kind of doing it, and it's happening. Team design is happening all around us, or rather, the formation of teams is happening, and most of them are not designed. They're not thought about. It's like, how are we actually going to gather? How are we actually going to define what our objective is, and so on? Or we default to very old-fashioned technology, like we were saying, a lot of very old mental models, very hierarchical mental models from the Industrial Revolution and so on. So it's largely an area that is not thought about. So saying that as one word, one sentence, it would be being conscious on the way that you think about teams and organizing. And here is where the difference would come in between different generations of team design. So in general, the most basic way is organizing people. So which people do you need, and which role is each person going to do? And that's largely what is being done until about now, but it's come short. So where I would say is ultimately is that team design in its new incarnation, and why now is becoming a new thing, and there is some people like myself who are starting to talk about it again, is we're saying team design is designing conversations, or designing, but not conversations as a one-off, but conversations as an ongoing activity between a group of people who have different needs that they're trying to satisfy through being together.
Okay, so does that put you involved in the process of hiring people, and you're deciding who comes in and who works in the organization, or yeah?
So that's one way to look about it, and I know I'm not giving you like the easy, super tangible answer, but that's kind of like the purpose of this talk in a way, is to take it a step back and reflect on, or at least create that uncertainty or that sense of discomfort. Then you can choose to discard it and say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, largely doesn't matter. But you have this group of people, and you're trying to make something good happen there for different people. So you can think, who do I hire? How do I create that psychological contract, which is what's the job description? This is what you're going to get in exchange of what you put in. You get this much out. That's one way to look about it. That's kind of like the old-fashioned way to look about it. Another way to look about it is you can say, no, this is all about leadership. So actually what we're going to do is we're going to do leadership development, and we're going to make sure we hire a really badass leader, and they're going to lead the team, and they're going to find the people that they need to achieve whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. There is another way to look about it that is all about the feel-good factor. So then you can go and get the people together, and then what you're focusing on is, do people get along? Are they kind of friendly with one another? Do they have good relationships? In that case, the kind of strategies that you end up using to create a good team is going to paintball together, or creating or having meals together, or going for Friday drinks, or whatever activities is to create relationships. That's a different option. So where I'm standing is a little bit the meta space, where you go like, there is all these different ways you can look about it, and how do you navigate that? And how do you realize that the way you are thinking about the team is only one of many possibilities, and most likely not one that is serving you very well, just something you have inherited from the previous past. So maybe, you know what, let me see. So I can share the screen and show this stuff, for example. So this is some of the ways we have looked into it. And are all things that are related with team design. And you can keep on expanding this cloud. It's just that we got ourselves to this space where everyone out there will be encountering more technologies or methodologies or frameworks and so on that they can ever digest. And we have even forgotten the question of like, what are we looking for other than performance or increased revenue and so on, which are simplistic answers. Because ultimately all of them have a blind side. Say we want to increase revenue and so on. And then if we forget about one of the stakeholders, even that simple objective of increasing revenue gets cut short. How do you feel about that? Is that making any sense to you?
Actually, it makes perfect sense. And the thing is, like you were saying earlier, it goes very into like a hippy dippy direction, very much so, because it seems that in that certain instance, you're looking to analyze the personality of individuals and then specifically see if they can coherently work with each other, which is actually something that's very important in whatever business that anyone is in. So it actually seems very valuable. The thing is quantifying that and then showcasing that value to a business, it seems like a tough sell, especially, I don't know how you do your work, basically. Like, do you come into someone's office and then you give them a series of tests that they have to take to qualify what type of personalities they have? How do you do a job like that?
Okay, so I'm understanding your question as having two sides. One is kind of like acknowledging that this seems valuable, but it's hard to understand what exactly the value is and how do you justify it against the million other priorities that anyone in a business has and is trying to respond to. And then there is another bit that I understood that was about kind of like more about the how it happens and the personalities, or how do you measure personalities, or how do you measure the values on that? So does that more or less resonate with what you're asking?
Yes.
Cool. So on the second bit about the personalities, I would actually say that it's not about personality. So let me try to answer quickly. And then now that we start to have a general understanding, even if it's more ground up, like bottom up, rather than a top down, this is the definition, this is the stuff, and this is the structure. And I'll then try to give you a super quick rundown through a little bit more of what my thinking is in this space, because I would go understanding the personalities of the people is actually not very valuable. It is valuable in general, like if you have the time and is not fighting against any other priority or competing for any other resource, sure, do it, that's awesome. But if you have very limited time, very limited priorities, and you have, say, 100 teams in your organization, and you need to respond to faster change, a lot of uncertainty, disruptions in the market, a million different things that you have to do when you're managing a medium to large size organization, then how do you decide between them? And I'll go into that. Generally, where I come from is I work with larger organizations because there the volume of people means that they have so many issues with complexity within them. They start to have silos, they start to have duplication of work, they start to have problems to adapt quickly to change. They start to have cultural issues at scale, which are really hard to change. So the way I usually work with people is I approach them from their pain points, and from those pain points, I start to going towards a solution. Well, if I approach it generally like, here is the theory and all that, and I give some talks like that, and sometimes I preach it, most people are like, cool, that sounds really awesome. Now I'm gonna go back and worry about my pain point, because it's too general in a way. It feels too meta, too theoretical. So let me go back to here and give you an idea of what I was talking about. Let me maybe go from here. So the issue now is that there is technological acceleration, ecological crisis, market volatility, remote work, a whole bunch of things that are happening. If you look at the number of factors that organizations track for success, it's just been increasing. It used to be roughly 8 factors only 30 years ago. Like 8 requirements for their product and what meant to be working well, to be the organization working well. And we're increasing more and more stuff. Now we need to be doing sustainability, and we need to be coaching our people, and we need to be dealing with communities, and we need to be adapting in this area and this other area. And it's become something like 46 different success factors that are important. That includes kind of like price and quality and delivery time and a whole bunch of other things related to branding and related to how you treat employees and how you relate with governments and how you manage taxes and all of these kind of things. So it's just become a lot more complex to do a good job in general. And that means that most organizations are just not equipped. They're trying to go at it with a lot of brute force. And you end up finding systematically this case of either startups that scale up really quickly and then have loads of cultural issues, or forget one of the fundamental needs of one of their stakeholders, and then that comes back to bite them, because consumers eventually realize, and they go, well, actually these guys are a bit of a douche, so I don't want to buy from them. And there is so many ways in which you can be a douche that is actually really hard not to be when you're trying to grow really, really fast and scale and make a lot of money for your investors or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Even if you're trying to be a good company, you realize that being sustainable or having a well-being culture or being caring, or there is so many ways in which you can fail at it, that all of these things are relatively hard. Just because our modern life is extraordinarily complex and fast-paced, and there is so much we don't know. So the traditional answer has been, let's look for leaders. And then you can do leadership development. This is the stuff I was saying. And from kind of industrial era thinking, you start to divide from thinkers and doers. So you have the thinkers, they need to be strategists, they need to be coordinators. Then with knowledge work, you start to, also they need to be innovative, they need to envision the future, they need to be visionaries. Then also because you cannot see what people are doing directly, they're maybe working remotely, or is happening in a different team than you are, or you're not an expert in that area, but you need their expertise. So you actually need to motivate them and create a healthy culture. So you also need to embody that culture, and then your leader is also responsible for that. And then because everything is changing so fast, then you also need to coach people to give the best of themselves. So the leader also needs to become a coach. And of course, there is no one who can do all these different areas very well together. So we have mental health issues. That's one of the clear things that happen, underperformance in different ways, or the ways that organizations are failing. And ultimately what we're forgetting is that it's a team job. But when it comes to building teams, it's really hard, and we have no clue how to do it. Still, the third biggest cause of failure for startups is having the wrong team. And then you can see loads of metrics around miscommunication, employee engagement, and other stuff that generally show that we're still not very good at creating basic units of collaboration.
So
personality, and this is then the solutions. Personality is not wrong, it's one of the answers. It's just one of the things that come into this cloud. So let me go, actually, let me jump a bit and I'll give you something that comes here. So what I've been doing is a lot of research on this, and where it comes down, and there is this guy, he's Hackman, he spent a lifetime studying teams, and he says that team design and structure account for 60% of team performance. And that's probably the most important finding, is that is the interactions of a team, not the skill of its members. You can have people who have individually any type of personality. You can even mix the right type of personality, but it's not about putting people in a room and hoping that they're going to work well together. It's not even about putting people in a room and giving them an objective and hoping they're going to work well together. It's about how they interact with one another and designing that. And that's kind of like the new generation of team design that we're talking about. The challenge has been that we don't really think about interactions in a purposeful way. We don't, Agile, or rather Scrum, which is a productized way of Agile, and I'm using it as an example because you guys might be a bit familiar with some of the terminology, starts to prescribe some of the interactions. So you have a retrospective that should be run every month. That's one type of purposeful interaction that's being designed. You have another type of interaction that's a stand-up, and you need to do stand-ups maybe once a week, and so on. And that's another type of interaction that's been designed. If you go to more of the self-managed stuff, in Holacracy, you would have governance meetings, which are meant to happen roughly monthly. And then you reorganize roles and so on. So you start to have these different interactions that you create, but still the map of which are the interactions that we should think about, or at least what are the key objectives or key things that these interactions should accomplish for our team so that we have a good team. That's the big question. Which interactions actually make a difference, and how do you want to design water cooler conversations? Do you want to design after work drinks? Do you want to design, what's the purpose of these different interactions that we're trying to do? And where we come down is, and I mean, this is the work of a few years, but where it ends up coming to is down to these 6 key outcomes or interactions that you need to create. I call them conversations because they're ongoing and they're between people rather than a single individual. So you end up having a conversation that's about identity, about who we are as a team. What's our culture, what are the needs of our stakeholders, and how do those needs come together to create a purpose for this team to achieve. You can define purpose as something aspirational, external to the team, but ultimately if the individuals, the different stakeholders that are part of it or engaged in this team are not getting what they need, the team is going to stop existing. And what they want out of a team can be very well something very aspirational, like the founder of the team, one of the stakeholders can be like, no, what I want is have a positive impact towards sustainability, towards hunger, and so on. And amazing that that's part of the reason for being of the team, was that this person created it for that purpose. But other people are going to come with different needs and different hopes and desires and so on. So how do you negotiate that? That end up creating of who we are, as much as the values and the culture that you observe. So that's one conversation. That's one whole area of interaction that you need to think about. Then there is another one about, how is the world changing? How is it evolving? How do we go there? And how do we need to look like in the future to fit that environment? Then about change, going from where we are to where we need to go, coordination in between the different people, operations, that's paying a lot of attention to the detail, and then finally support. How do we ensure that the people that are part of the team have the support they need to be able to be present and contribute to the endeavor of the team, physically, intellectually, and emotionally? And the work that I do is basically looking at how teams are performing across these different areas, how they are having those conversations, where they're falling behind, and then designing interactions, designing meeting processes, sometimes changing role descriptions, sometimes hiring different people, sometimes just having a conversation so they realize that they're not doing one of these things and that the team is going to suffer as a result. And I could go with more time into a lot of detail of why not fulfilling one of these areas will lead to significant harm for the endeavor of the team, but ultimately they are to some extent self-explanatory. The issue is more that some of us tend to focus in some of these and not the others. So some of us tend to be very philosophy-oriented or very visionary-oriented or very strategy-oriented, coordination or attention to detail, or very caring and kind of gardener watering the other people but not doing the other things. And so hence the need to have a bit of reflection around it and realize what are your blind spots as a team, and adapt.